I want to thank you for your attention and your personal sacrifice in this long trial. And, we duly appreciate it. Let's take a few minutes of your time to emphasize a few things that we've gone over for the last couple months. You don't cut somebody up, another human being, into pieces and bag them up, dump them in the bay when you act in self-defense. It just doesn't happen. You don't butcher somebody, put them in pieces, bag them up, dump them in the bay because there's an accident. You cannot plan to have an accident, and you cannot plan to act in self-defense. It doesn't happen. That's what the evidence is in this case. The burden of proof is on the state to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Robert Durst intentionally or knowingly shot and killed Morris Black, or that Robert Durst, intending to cause serious bodily injury to Morris Black, did an act clearly dangerous to human life by shooting him or shooting at him or in the direction of Morris Black and caused his death. Once that's done, and unless there's some other evidence that changes your mind, you must find him guilty of murder. That's it. You can take all the evidence in the case and look at it. Everything from the first witness, Mr. Vina, all the way to the end. You look at every piece of evidence you heard and consider it. You can't segment it and only look at certain portions of it and ignore everything else. That's not proper. Your job as a juror is to look and consider all the evidence. Now, as a juror, you have the right and the duty to look at evidence and find that that's just not credible. That doesn't make any sense. I don't have to rely on that. I'm not going to rely on that. I don't believe that evidence. That's your job, and that's proper. That is considering it, though. Once you consider it, you find it has absolutely no weight and no merit whatsoever, you're free to discard that information. In this case, if the sole fact that Robert Durst severed Morris Black's head at the 6th vertebrae convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt that he intentionally or knowingly murdered Morris Black, and it was no accident, and it was not self-defense, that's it. If that sole fact convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt that that's what happened, that's it. It's that simple. If, in this case, the fact that Robert Durst packed up his stuff, split town, if that convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt that he murdered Morris Black, and that it was not an accident, and it was not self-defense, that's all the evidence that's required to convict him. It's that simple.
Your Honor, that's a misstatement of the law.
Right. The court has given the jury instructions, and you abide by the instructions given in the charge. You may proceed, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you. If in this case the facts of dismemberment and flight together convince you that he's guilty of murder, and it wasn't an accident, and it wasn't self-defense, that's all that it takes. That's all the evidence you need if you are convinced by that. It's that simple.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll make my objection one more time, Your Honor. And that is, the jury must be convinced that Mr. Durst voluntarily and intentionally killed Morris Black. The fact of running away alone cannot supply that evidence. We object to a misstatement of the evidence.
Overruled. You'll be instructed by the instructions given to you in the court's charged and abide by those solely. You may proceed.
So I don't continue to make that objection.
That'll be fine. You have a writing objection. That's fine, sir.
The defense wants you to believe that since Mr. Durst's first wife, Kathy Durst, disappeared and that his friend Susan Berman was murdered, that somehow excuses or justifies his actions in dismembering Morris Black in this case, that somehow gives you a rational explanation for the brutal and vile acts that we've seen in this case. That it somehow justifies doing this to another human being. You cannot take those cases as evidence of guilt in this case, but you don't get rewarded for it either. If the fact that Robert Durst bought the green thumb bow saw, 21-inch, at least 5 days prior to Morris Black being shot, convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt that Robert Durst murdered Morris Black, that's all that it takes. It's that simple. But there's much, much more in this case. You were made a number of promises and opening statements that were never kept. There was this scheme, as it was referred to in opening statement, that Morris Black had to buy glasses for the needy. This is a man who was so cheap, so frugal, if you want to call it that he wouldn't even turn on his own gas, take a hot shower. He would unscrew a light bulb so he wouldn't have to pay for the electricity. But yet he spent thousands of dollars of his own money for no reward, no compensation, no recognition to give them to the needy. That sounds like a scheme to you? It doesn't to me. That's not a scheme. That's a man doing something that he thought was beneficial to the community. And if he felt that he was being taken advantage of, yeah, he'd let you know. He said, you're not going to take advantage of me. I'm spending my own money to give you something, and you're wasting your money on cigarettes and alcohol. I'm not going to help you because you won't help yourself. That's Morris Black. You were promised there'd be evidence that he carried a stick and threatened people with it. There is no such evidence. You were promised that Durst was with Morris Black on several occasions when Morris attacked men twice his size. Well, that didn't happen either. There was one occasion in which, and only according to Mr. Durst, there were no other witnesses that came in and talked about this, that he came to the defense of Robert Durst and pushed him in. That's not attacking men twice your size on several occasions. And that, you can only believe that if you believe him. You were told that he and Morris would go to places. You'd go to the East Street Coffee House, the Rosenberg Library, and Kroger store. Not one person came in here and told you that they saw those two together, ever. Again, it's only according to what Robert Durst said. They told you that the police were called to the incident with the Frisbee and that they had to come and break it up. No police were called. No police officer came in here to testify that they responded to a scene. No police report was ever generated. And even the defendant didn't get up there and tell you that the police were called. He can't even keep the lie straight. You were promised that Morris had a thing about guns. Again, that's only according to Robert Durst. Not one other person came in here and told you that he had ever mentioned anything about a gun. Gary Anderson and Ted Hanley probably spent more time and saw Morris more than any person here in Galveston, and not one time did they ever mention anything. He mentioned anything about this fascination he had with guns. They promised you during the opening statement that Morris Black shot the eviction letter. We brought you the eviction letter. There's no bullet holes in it.
Judge, that's a mistake. I know what I said. Shot at eviction. Shot at it is what I said. It's a mistake.
Overruled. The jury will remember the testimony as they heard it. You may proceed.
You were promised by Mr. Ramsey there are bizarre and grotesque facts in this case that you will want answers to. And not a single answer has been provided. We're still waiting for those answers to be provided. But they're never going to come because there is no answer. The only answer is there's these bizarre and grotesque facts because he murdered Morris Black in cold blood and tried to get away with it. And he came oh so very close to doing so. If he hadn't left that one flyer, 2213 Avenue K, to resident, this investigation never would have gone off the ground, ever. We'd still be wondering who that person is that got chopped up and dumped in the bay. All the stuff in the trash at 2213K would have been in the city dump under tons of other garbage. If not for that one flyer and good, hard, dedicated police work, relentless police work, he would have got away with it. They told you they will call doctors to talk about Asperger's and will explain his bizarre behavior. No such doctors were called. No such explanation was ever given. It was promised to you that it would be proved beyond doubt that he suffers from Asperger's and that makes him susceptible to panic states. panic attacks. No such evidence exists. They promised you that Asperger's leads to disassociation. There's no evidence of disassociation. You were promised that there was pitiful attempts to clean up the apartment. Mr. Durst, it's uncontradicted that he chopped up another human being with knives, saws, and there was blood everywhere, 4 to 5 quarts of blood in the human body, and the only thing left was a few 1 millimeter size specks on the wall and whatever soaked through the floor. A couple drops on a drop cloth. Is that pitiful? That's all there was left of Morris Black in that apartment where he was chopped up and butchered and murdered. The defense wants you to believe that a lack of a logical, objective motive is a reason for doubt in this case. And a statement like that has absolutely no meaning in a case where the defendant has demonstrated the ability and the willingness to commit horrid, indescribable acts of butchery to another human being. If you can do what he's done, you can sure kill somebody in cold blood. No question about it. You can't claim on one hand that you need a logical, a reasonable explanation for a motive for a killing, and then at the very same time say, well, you know, just because he cut somebody up, butchered them, and dumped them, well, just ignore that. You can't have it both ways. We know what he's capable of. You know what he's capable of. Probably something that you thought nobody was capable of 2 months ago, 3 months ago, before you found out about this case. What about Mr. Durst? What about his credibility? Their case is based upon what he says, and they want you to believe him. He told you that he did not engage in high school activities, that he went home right after school. Well, that's not true. We showed that he was involved in the soccer club for a year, the leaders club for a year, the projection club for 3 years, aviation club 2 years, camera club for 2 years, Spanish club for 2 years. He was a student teacher at his religious school, and that he was a member of the community youth group. He got up there and lied to you. He told you that he did not speak Spanish. But yet when he was booked in over Galveston Police Department, and in the booking form, are you bilingual? He answered yes. I speak English and I speak Spanish. Lied to you again. He told his bonding company that he lived at 3111 Wellborn in Dallas. Another lie. He told the bonding company this phone number was 214-219-2438. Yet another lie. He told the bonding company that he was a self-employed writer for the last 5 years, making $120,000 a year from writing. That too was a lie. He told Bail America that Deborah Sheridan was his friend, not his wife, in reality, which she is in reality on paper. That was another lie. He told Troy McLaney on the phone, I'll be there at the October 16th hearing. I'll be there. He lied again. He wasn't there. He fled. He ran. Just another lie. He lied about his address when he bought the .22 caliber pistol that he used to murder Morris Black. He lied about his phone number when he bought that pistol, even a different phone number than he told the bonding company. He lied to the Central Towers. Back in 1997, he was lying. He told them that he owned Robert Durst Botany. He's not a botanist. That's a lie. That he worked at Pacific Lumber for 15 years, making $18,000 a month. That's a lie. But yet you're supposed to believe what he tells you. He stated that his supervisor was James Closty. Yet another lie. That was a high school classmate of his. And Mr. Durst actually has an American Express card in the evidence, the records and evidence, under the name of James Closty. He got a card on his account under his name. And he also used Kathy Durst's social security number to get that card. His missing wife, he's using her social security number to get that card. Yet another lie. But yet we're supposed to trust this man and believe what he says. He stated he had a PhD from UCLA to Central Towers on the application. Yet another lie. His nearest relative was Julie Baumgold, his daughter. Yet another lie. He lied when he came back to Galveston and checked into the Holiday Inn Express. He said he was Jim Turst. Yet another lie. He gave an address of 3124 Wellborn, Dallas. Just another lie. The man sitting before you cannot tell the truth. And you cannot believe anything he says. He's demonstrated that over and over and over. He's a liar. After he was arrested in Pennsylvania, he gave a false social security number to the Wegmans security people. And then he tells you, the jury, that he first met Morris Black when he came in. He was watching the Wall Street Week, and there happened to be a knock on the door, and a man who turns out to be Morris Black happens to be standing there. And he just happens to mention that I like to watch Wall Street Week, and it just happens to be the exact same show he's watching at that time. Just a little too much of a coincidence, don't you think? Durst testified and told you that Morris Black liked telling the story about Japan. He told it all the time. Gary Anderson never heard it. Ted Hanley never heard it. They saw Morris frequently. He never talked about that. And what did the social worker tell you? What did the medical records tell you? He wept openly when he discussed it. It wasn't something he liked talking about. It was a very painful experience for him. And he wept openly when discussing that. Told her in confidence and in private. The Durst wants you to believe that he just goes around and tells everybody. He lied to Zena Simmons, the lady who came to clean his apartment. He said he was Robert Closty. Again, another lie. He can't be Robert Durst at 2213 Avenue K because he knows what's going to happen next week. There's going to be a killing. There's going to be a murder. He can't be Robert Durst at 2213 Avenue K. He lied to Rent-A-Rack. He's not Morris Black. He lied to Johnny Foster, telling him, I'll bring the car back. I'll return it on time. The Rent-A-Rack records are in evidence. I'll return the vehicle on or before the time shown in the rental agreement. That was a lie. If I need to keep the vehicle beyond the time the rental office must approve it, I will make the additional rent payments before the original due date. That was a lie. No person may drive the vehicle unless they're approved on the rental office and listed on the rental agreement. That was a lie. I will return the vehicle in the same condition I took it. That was a lie. He never had any intention of returning that vehicle. I will not take the vehicle outside the geographic area defined on the rental agreement. That defined on the rental agreement, 75 miles. Just another lie. He lied to the hotels in Alabama. He was impersonating Morris Black. He lied to the hotels up and down Connecticut and in Pennsylvania at the Staybridge Suites. He said he's Emilio Vignone. Just another lie. But yet we're supposed to believe him. He lied to Shelley Cox when he called her and said, I got a tax hearing on Tuesday morning and I need to be in an apartment in Dallas by Monday afternoon because I got a tax hearing. I need to prove I was living in Dallas and I'm living in Dallas. That's another lie. He lied to Dillman. He told Dillman that he was Dorothy Siner. He'd call him and tell him I was the brother-in-law. Just another lie. He lied about calling for Morris Black. He was calling to see if he could cover up that apartment. Klaus Dillman told you that he got the phone call after the last rent payment. The last rent payment was October. The same thing his wife told you. It was after the October payment. Check, money order, whatever, it's all money. Those were his words. He lied to the dry cleaners in New Orleans. He said he was G. Perrin. He lied to Michael Ogden and said he was Diane Wynn. He lied in New Orleans and here saying he was James Cordes. He lied to Ted Hanley saying he was mute. And then when Ted Hanley started using the American Sign Language to him, he realized that that lie's not going to work because this man knows sign language. So then he had to start talking. He lied to Dillman so Dillman would keep the utilities on. And then he'd just pay him because he knew he didn't have a Social Security number to activate the utilities. Another lie. He lied when he wrote the letter about Morris Black moving out to Dillman. He lied to a psychologist back in the 1980s. He'd only tell them what he wanted so he can get the answer he wanted to hear. He didn't want to tell them the truth. He wanted to only tell them enough to get the answer he wanted. And that's what he's doing to you, ladies and gentlemen. He lied to Officer Boehner in Pennsylvania at Wegmans Grocery. He said he wanted to go out and get his identification out of the glove box. This is Robert Durst Identification. A handgun, 38 Special. That's the identification in the glove box. There's no identification in that glove box. The only identification in that glove box was this right here. That was his identification that he wanted to go get. He lied to Boehner. And luckily, Boehner didn't fall for it. He lied about his marital status in Pennsylvania. He said he was divorced. He changed the license plate on the car he stole out of Alabama. He testified to you that Morris Black was proud of the eviction letter, that he was proud of it. He was glad that it happened. And then he turns around and tells you 2 months later, after 2 months of having the letter, he's suddenly mad about it, puts it on the wall and shoots it. Doesn't make sense. He's either proud of it or he's mad about it, but you can't have it both ways. He's told that he was a strong man. He was so strong he can't even control a 9mm. Inconsistencies, he's lying. He testified at one point that he thought he threw everything in the bay, that everything from Morris Black's apartment and his apartment and the tools and everything should be found right there. He doesn't understand why more stuff wasn't found. But during cross-examination, he testified that he remembered throwing the eviction letter into the trash can. Just another lie. He testified he doesn't remember the cleanup, but he also testified that he did not clean the blood off of this gun. If you don't remember the cleanup, how can you get up there and testify that you didn't clean the blood off the gun? You can't. It's a lie. He does remember it. He remembers everything about it. He's lying to you, ladies and gentlemen. Just another lie. He testified that he used 2 saws and a big axe to cut up Morris Black. He also testified that he didn't remember anything about the dismemberment. So those two things can't be true. Look at these pictures. This is what Mr. Durst did to Morris Black. It's clear that he was not cut up with an axe. An axe is not going to do this. This was a knife, some sharp instrument where he could cut the skin, cut all the muscle all the way to the bone, pull the tissue and the muscle back, get to the bone, and saw it off so he can dump the body and get away with murder. He testified that he did not remember the process of cutting up Morris Black. But when he was pressed, he angrily told you there was blood everywhere and he kept spitting up. Can't have it both ways. One of them's a lie. He's lying. He testified that Morris Black fakes heart attacks. You've seen the medical records. You've heard the testimony. He had multiple stentings in 1999. He had severe heart disease and tissue evidence in old heart attack. Why would he make a statement about faking heart attacks? Just another lie. He testified on cross-examination that he did not even think he knew there was a hearing in Galveston on 10/16 that Tuesday morning. But he told Shelley Cox that he had a tax hearing the next morning. Just another lie to you, ladies and gentlemen. But the defense wants you to put your faith in that man and believe what he tells you. Dr. Harvey, he came in here and told you what happened to Morris Black. Morris Black may not be able to come in here and testify, but his body can. His body coming in here speaks loud and clear. He was murdered. Smooth cuts by sharp instruments to the skin and muscle. The bone appeared to be solid. It's what happened to his left leg. It's the same thing that happened to his right leg. It's the same thing that happened to his, I believe it was his right arm. Excuse me, his left arm. But when you get up to his right arm, he's losing patience. Saw's halfway through, or about a third of the way through the bone, and he gets tired. He's either getting tired or he's running out of time. He's running out of patience or he's running out of time. One of them, he's got to get rid of this body. So he just shatters the rest of it, so he can dump him and get on with his life. The left arm shows 2 bruises on the back elbow area. They were fresh and dark purple on the inside portion of the arm. Right arm had a single bruise on the posterior right arm, outside between the 2 sides of the arm. 2 bruises on the outside of this arm, the right arm. The head and the neck were severed at the 6th vertebrae. There was severe heart disease, dead tissue, evidence of healing heart attack. But the lungs is where the story starts to get told. What happened to Morris Black? Pattern of aspirated blood, red blood cells in the alveolar sacs. Dr. Harvey told you that it was visible with the eye and microscopically. You can look at the heart and see the blood that got aspirated into his lungs. You can look at the microscopic slides and see the blood that was aspirated into his lungs. From the severe trauma that occurred to his head. What about the back? The back speaks volumes for Morris Black. Across the top of the shoulders, there is area of bruising across the shoulders, multiple red-brown bruises occasionally blending together. This is not one blow. These are multiple blows across the top of the shoulders. Not one big bruise. Multiple blows that occasionally blend together. You don't get multiple blows from falling one time. The left side of the back, multiple contusions. 6 down the side of his back. You can't get the shoulders and the side with one fall. The middle of the back, a single contusion. Right side of the body, 3 reddish-brown bruises, triangular pattern, 3 independent blows or impacts. So he's got bruises down left side, right side, shoulder, middle of the back, and again in the hollow of the back. If you fall on your back, this is the curved in area Dr. Harvey told you. Not consistent with the fall on a flat plane surface. Didn't happen the way he told you it happened. Morris Black's telling you what happened. He was beaten. These occurred before death due to the intensity of the color and the presence in the deep part of the tissue. Dr. Harvey can't tell you exactly when they happened. He can date them up to 5 days. Come on, ladies and gentlemen. This man was murdered, he was beaten, he was dismembered and dumped in the bay. We don't have evidence of one trauma, we have evidence of multiple traumas, multiple contusions to multiple areas of his back. He was beaten repeatedly, and those injuries are not consistent with someone falling on a flat, plane surface. At the request of defense counsel and his expert, he did some additional testing to distinguish between bruising and lividity. And what did this do? This confirmed his findings. These are deep tissue bruises Morris is speaking to you, ladies and gentlemen. He's speaking to you loud and clear. He's telling you I was beaten. I was beaten repeatedly before I was shot, before I was cut into pieces and dumped in the bay. I was beaten during the course of my murder.
I'm sorry, I can't object to that. That's not what Dr. Harvey said. I ask that he stay in the record with what Dr. Harvey said about that.
Overruled. The jury will remember the testimony as they heard it. You may proceed.
We brought you a lot of witnesses over the last couple of weeks. David Avina, his family was out there. His daughter, I don't want to see it anymore. His own words, it was horrifying. Dive teams from Galveston Police Department and the Sheriff's Department went out and made multiple dives, covering the entire area around the recovery of body parts of Morris Black, the ones that were there to be recovered. There was no axe, there was no saw, there was nothing dumped there but Morris Black. Mr. Dillman, he came in and told you Morris Black was a pain. He was in such a pain that he finally got rid of him. He evicted him. But he never did anything violent. He was a loudmouth and he complained a lot. That's all he was. And he turned off the electricity to other tenants. He wasn't going to lose his other tenants. He was going to get rid of Morris Black. Sergeant Jones came in here and he testified for a long time. He was up here for at least a couple days on direct examination alone, telling you about all the things that were collected and all the things that connected Mr. Durst to that apartment that they found only through their hard work, only through their dedication and their prompt action in this case. If they waited till that trash got picked up, there wouldn't be no search warrant. There wouldn't be no evidence to find in the trash can. There would be no evidence to find in either one of those apartments because they never would have gotten in either one of those apartments. If it was not for those gentlemen's hard work and dedication, we wouldn't be here. And Mr. Durst would have gotten away with murder. Mr. Jones told you there was drastic evidence of cleanup. You've heard it. Somebody was dismembered, cut into pieces. His head was severed in that apartment. And the only thing that was left was a few specks on the wall and whatever soaked through the floor that he couldn't clean up. That's, and a couple drops on a drop cloth. That's what was left. No fingerprints in apartment number 1 at all. Almost no fingerprints at all in apartment number 2, save one unidentified print on the toilet in apartment number 2. That's it. Drastic evidence to clean up. You found latex gloves. Tracy Fontenot came in here and testified for you. She was contacted by Sergeant Caslas. When Durst comes back, I need to talk to him. Would you page me? So when he finally does come back on the 9th of October, being nervous, not making eye contact, he wasn't just coming back to get glasses casually, to come back to talk to a lawyer. He was coming back to remove those glasses for whatever reason from Galveston. His apartment was packed. It was ready to go. He wasn't here to talk to a lawyer. He came in under a false name, false address. He left the evidence that he took with him. It secreted away in New Orleans. He took the running money that he took, secreted away in New Orleans, where he could go back and get it. He came in here, he was nervous, he wouldn't look at her, and he said, "This is taking way too long, I gotta get out of here." And he bolted for the door. He almost jogged to the door as her testimony. That's not somebody who's coming back to clear things up. That's somebody who's trying to make sure all the bases are covered. And when he came back, he had been monitoring the investigation. The evidence shows, and he admitted, that on one of those pieces of papers found in the trash, GALV News. He wrote that down so he would have it and he could monitor the course of this investigation to make sure whether it was safe to come back or not, to determine whether he got away with murder. Tom Bevel came in and testified to you that the source of the blood was at or near the floor, consistent with somebody's head on the floor. Can't tell you whether it was face up or face down or on the side, but it was at the very maximum 2 feet away from the wall, probably closer. There was no void area on the wall. It was not forward spatter because there's no bullet hole in your greater volume of blood when you have forward spatter. And think about the story, the lie Robert Durst wants you to believe. It doesn't make sense. These two men are the same height. There's no void area on the wall. So if you want to believe what he says, when he brings the gun up and they have the struggle over the gun, he's closer to the wall than Morris Black is. When they fall, somehow Morris Black falls further than he does. It's the only way to get his head out past Robert Durst's head. So even though he's closer in the same height, his head has to fall further than Robert Durst does because there's no void area on the wall. Doesn't make any sense. Plus, the two of them have to fall in a way that they're both within 2 feet of the wall, probably less. Doesn't make sense. Just another lie. David Rossi came in here and told you they did both apartments in the hallway with fluorescein. And they got some reactions for fluorescein, presumptive test for blood, or evidence of residual blood. And not one of those places came back. Not one came back with any DNA evidence. Amateurish cleanup job. Pam McGinnis wants you to, that's her opinion. What's yours? You butcher somebody in an apartment and you got no evidence of blood except what was left on the wall and underneath the floor. Everything else, everything that tested positive on the fluorescein came back negative. Does that sound like an amateurish job to you? She even admitted that, Pam McGinnis, that fluorescein reacts with bleach. May not have been blood at all. It was just bleach. Brom Cromley came in and told you about that the casing that was found came out of this gun. Talked about firing pin impressions, extractor impressions, breech impressions, side casing impressions, injector marks, striated marks, chamber marks. Didn't say anything about jam marks. No evidence that the bullet was jammed in the slide of the gun. If you believe Mr. Durst's testimony, his hand was over the ejection port. When that slide comes back, there's no place for that casing to go. And when it goes back, it's going to get jammed in the slide. Didn't happen. He told you about hollow point bullets. They cause greater expansion upon impact. They're designed not to penetrate as deeply. They're designed for penetrating the body, to expand and do more damage. It's not as loud as a .45, and he also found that gun would not misfire. April Orbison came in and told you about all the things that were tested, and they were voluminous. Many, many, many items that were tested, and she told you what came back. The plywood, it proves the identity of Morris Black. 1 in 495 billion Caucasians, 1 in 566 billion blacks, and 1 in 2 trillion Hispanics. Plywood, couldn't get to it, couldn't clean it. The car carpet from his own vehicle, where he transported Morris Black's remains, dump him, get rid of him so he could disappear forever. Same numbers. The stains on the wall showing where Morris Black had been shot, same numbers. There was one napkin in apartment number 1 that was consistent with Morris Black's blood. It was 1 in 53 billion Caucasians, 1 in 76.8 billion blacks, and 1 in 351 billion Hispanics. There was one napkin on the toilet in apartment number 1 and had his blood on it. The wood door facing from the area where the gunshot spatter was came back with even lower numbers, and one sock from the trash can consistent with Morris Black's blood. Javier Flores tested the drop cloth. There was a couple drops. It was the identity of Morris Black. Michael Martinez came in here and told you about there was no stippling on the shirt. It was tested. It had been in the bay. It had been rolled around in the bay for a long time, gotten wet, been with part of the body. The area of the neck was cut away. And he also told you may get blowback on the gun if it's close enough to the body. If it's within a certain number of inches, you could get blowback on the gun. Catherine Smith came in and told you a little bit about Morris Black. We didn't hide anything about Morris Black. He was cantankerous, he was loudmouth, he was argumentative, but he wasn't a violent man. She told you that he wasn't understanding, he got mad, he yelled, but he was not unique. He's not the only man that acts that way. Gary Anderson, he saw him maybe 3 times a week. In his own words, generally a quiet, low-toned voice. He looked up eyeglasses companies, passed out a couple times because of his heart condition. He had issues with ongoing fire safety for 6 to 8 months. They were getting, everything that he complained about was correct. Everything he complained about was correct. But they weren't fixing it fast enough for Morris Black, so he kept complaining. 6 to 8 months, and these things that he was still complaining about were not done yet. He also told you that Morris was not unique in the way he reacted to security. Other people reacted the same way. Zena Simmons came in here and told you about the man that she was introduced to as Robert Closty. He told her to clean her really well. Never used her service before. Gave her a false name. Was there with glasses, had tape on him. Trying to disguise himself. Couldn't be Robert Durst there at 2213 Avenue K because he knew what was coming. We introduced phone records showing you that he was using a cell phone, and he was using the cell phone in the area that covers 2213 Avenue K. You heard from Shelley Cox about the lies that she was told in his efforts to cover up the lies that he told down here. You heard from Deborah Myers from Continental that on the very day of the killing, the very day of the murder, he's planning round trips at 11 p.m. from Houston to LaGuardia. And then at 3:38 the following morning, just a couple hours later, he changed it to a one-way. And that flight was refunded on 10/1 at 6:56 a.m. You heard from Ms. Ribago. Ms. Ribago was next door that morning Morris Black was murdered. She heard 2 pops, she heard a loud thump, and she heard 2 pops. And she placed it somewhere around the noon hour. She replaced it somewhere around her soaps because she knew her soaps were on. She thought so much of it that she went outside, went to the porch, looked over at 2213 Avenue K, didn't see anything, looked the other direction, went all the way out to the sidewalk, looked up and down, didn't see anything, didn't see anybody running for help, didn't see anybody calling for help, trying to call 911. She didn't see it because it didn't happen. She never heard any yelling. She never heard any screaming. No one ever came to her door, knocking on the door on 9/28/2001. Mr. Ribago came in and testified that his normal routine was to get up somewhere around 6:30 in the morning, and the first thing he would do is go walk the dog. He saw a man walking towards 2213K, who obviously hadn't seen him yet, and then when he gets right in front of 2213K and sees Mr. Ribago, he exclaims, "Oh," turns around and walks off. That's because Robert Durst knew he could not be seen at 2213 Avenue K that week, because he knew what was coming. What did that man do? He walked down back to 22nd Street, walked down to the alley, came back in and tried to sneak into the apartment. Mr. Ribago saw him. So it was the same man that walked away. He knew he couldn't be seen at that apartment because he knew what was coming. He knew that Morris Black was going to be murdered. Miss Enriquez, she came in here and told you that she heard a lot of loud noise slamming. Sometime in the morning, she wasn't sure, or it was after her husband left for work. She tried to go to sleep. Maybe she had gotten to sleep. Maybe she was almost asleep. She heard a lot of banging downstairs. It sounded like a door slamming and slamming and slamming. She goes downstairs, and what does she see? She sees Robert Durst standing in the hallway, repeatedly banging the door. Well, what do you think? What are you going to presume? You hear a lot of banging, a lot of loud noises, and you see someone slamming the door. You're going to think that you heard a slamming door. You're not going to think, oh, I just heard a gunshot and somebody covered it up with a slamming door. She told him in Spanish, very loud, much noise, and he saw her, and he went inside and closed the door. No one ever came to her door that day, banging on it, banging loudly, pleading, call 911, call 911. No one did that. No one was up there screaming, pleading for help for 911. It didn't happen. Mr. Durst wants to say, well, I went to the wrong door. Well, so what? That door leads directly into their bathroom, inside their bedroom. If he's there banging on that door, they're going to hear it. If he's there frantically trying to get help, yelling, screaming, help, call 911, she's going to hear it. She didn't hear it because it didn't happen. The time of day that he wants you to believe it happened, because you can't have it in the time frame where the pops occurred. So he has to put it early in the morning. He has to distance himself from what Mr. Rivago heard and what Ms. Enriquez heard. So he wants to put it at 6 o'clock in the morning. If it's at 6 o'clock in the morning, Mr. Enriquez is home. He didn't hear it. He told you where he's from. He's very familiar with the sound of gunshots and bombs blowing up, because he's from Central America. He's very familiar with that. And he didn't hear that. It didn't happen. Right below where they sleep, there was supposedly a gunshot, if you want to believe what he said. And neither Mr. Enriquez or Mrs. Enriquez or their baby heard it. Because if the baby heard it, that baby would have woke up and started crying. If somebody was banging on the door at 6:15 in the morning, that baby would have woke up and she would have started crying. Didn't happen. Then he's supposed to go down the street and go up to a woman on the payphone who happens to be on a payphone at about 6:15 in the morning. And he runs up to her frantic, still pleading, please call 911, please call 911, call 911. And her reaction is to ignore him. Someone is frantic, runs up to you on the street, please call 911. And her reaction is to pull her son closer and ignore him and stare at him. Didn't happen. People don't act like that. Didn't happen. The man who was standing next to the car, he sees what happens. He sees that he's pleading for help with the woman, and she's ignoring him. And what does he do? He comes to her protection, according to him. He doesn't offer to call 911. He doesn't offer assistance. He stares at him for no reason and ignores his pleas for help. Ignores his pleas to call 911. Didn't happen. Then he supposedly goes to another house, knocks on the door, opens the screen door, knocks on the door. Doesn't know why he does not yelling for help anymore, but just knocks on the door this time. This is the house of the Rivagos. We know the Rivagos get up, or Mr. Rivago gets up around 6:30. It's roughly the time frame that he's trying to put there. He's walking the dog right after that, and he doesn't hear anything? Come on. Didn't happen. You heard from Johnny Foster. He came in here and told you that the man called and wanted to rent a car for a long period of time, but he didn't qualify. Didn't have the pay stub, and he didn't have a credit card, so he declined it. The man was persistent, called back. He thought about it for a while, and well, if I get fully insured, I can go ahead and do it. So he does it. He gives us $2,500 to us, what his value of the car is. And the man decides, tells the man what he wants. The man wants to think about it. He calls back and says, okay, I'll do it. But he wants to test drive first. So they go out, they take the test drive, and he specifically asked him about that inspection sticker. He wasn't going to make that mistake again. He already got arrested once in Galveston for a violation of the inspection sticker. He was going to make sure before he took that car that anything he needed was on that car. He wasn't making that same mistake again. You heard from Kay Massey, store security at Wegmans. They said she testified that they watch everyone that goes into the health and beauty section. That's one of their high theft areas. Nothing, excuse me, nothing unusual or bizarre until he starts stealing something. So they watch him and they take him into the security office after he tries to leave. He told them that he was from New York, and then so she asked him, well, you would have New York plates then? He says, well, no, actually I have Maryland plates. And that makes her somewhat more suspicious, and then he gives what turns out to be his false Social Security number. You heard from Officer Beener. Officer Beener came and responded normal Class C theft, comes out, and he wants to go to get his identification. And we've already seen this is his identification. And what's going to happen if he gets his identification? If Officer Beener wasn't sharp and on the ball, somebody was going to die. This is his identification. Full of hollow point bullets, 38 bullets. Somebody was going to die if he got to his identification. He ran an NCIC on Mr. Durst and asked him, when's the last time you were in Texas? When they found out there was a hit. And his reaction was all the color ran from his face. He got stone cold facial expression. Kimberly Pasenko came in here and told you where that money order was that Robert Durst bought to cover up his murder so the landlord wouldn't be coming looking for Morris Black. She told you when and where it was purchased. And with that information, Sergeant Caslas went and recovered the tapes showing Robert Durst pulling into the parking lot, no notes, walking in, asking for directions, going over to the bank, standing in line patiently, all clean pressed, button-down shirt, khakis, with his belt. No big deal. Come in, no notes. He remembers how much it's going to cost, exactly $300. And how did he know it was $300? And how did he know that Morris Black hadn't paid his rent? He thought about it. He knew it. He went and looked. He got the information he needed, and then he came and got the money order. He goes back out. He sits in his car. And we know he addressed the envelope, he finished the money order, he wrote the note to Dillman so he wouldn't be looking for him, and he told him he was leaving. Sergeant Caslas came in and testified. He puts it all together for you, from the beginning to the end. He told you that, honestly, they don't have any evidence of whose finger was on this trigger. That question was asked. And he told you, we don't have any evidence. Why? Because it was clean, just like everything else was. The blood was cleaned up. The apartment was cleaned up. Everything was cleaned. That's why there's no evidence. If it wasn't been cleaned, the blood had been cleaned off the gun. But after his entire investigation, and it didn't stop upon his arrest, it continued after his arrest. He told you that he went before a judge, he swore under oath for an arrest warrant for Robert Durst with charge of murder. Because that's what his investigation determined. And you heard his testimony, and his investigation, which continued after that point, still led him to the same conclusion: murder. Before Robert Durst runs, he makes sure he's got the website for the Galveston Daily News, so he's sure he knows whether it's safe to come back or not. He's monitoring the investigation from New Orleans. He ran not once, but twice. He got up and left on October 1st. When he was so distraught, he took the USA Today paper with him over to 2213 Avenue K, apartment number 2. Because everything was just fine. Morris Black's been murdered, been cut up and gotten rid of. I'm going to take the newspaper with me, sit down at the table, and read it. Why else is the October 1st newspaper there? He took it there to read the newspapers. He's not a man coming back to contact a lawyer. He came back a second time under a false name, had his room packed, ready to go, keeps the evidence he wanted secreted, his money secreted, and he realizes something is up, and he starts to run again. But he gets arrested at that time. That's not enough. Once he makes bond, he runs again. He runs again. If he really came back to contact a lawyer to try to clear this things up, okay, you've been arrested. Okay, that's fine. Why do you run again? You run again because you're guilty. You run again because you're a murderer. Because he doesn't want to have to pay for what he did. He doesn't want to be held responsible for the murder of Morris Black. When he was on the run the second time, he was out there counting his money, figuring out which hotel to stay at. If I can stay at this hotel for $99 a day instead of $149 a day, I can actually stay on almost a whole year with what I have. He pays Morris Black's rent because he doesn't want the landlord coming for him. He chopped up his body, he dumped him, and he was gone. He didn't need that body to disappear forever. He just needed a few days so so the trash could be taken out. And it was all over. And if that flyer, the 2213 Avenue K flyer to resident was in there, it wouldn't have mattered at all if it floated up. This is one mistake. There's a bullet hole in the wall because Robert Durst shot and missed Morris Black. Mr. Bago heard 2 pops. There was some time between the 2 pops. He shot, he missed, he beat him to the ground, and he executed him. He stood over his body and put a bullet into his head.
Absolute speculation, and it's the statement of a fact that is not in evidence. It's improper to state facts that are not supported by the evidence. We object and ask that he be required to stay in the record of this trial.
There's absolutely no evidence of a point-blank gunshot to Morris Black's face. There's no stipplings, no powder burns, no blowback on the gun or into the barrel of the gun. Absolutely no evidence supporting that. And what's Robert Durst's reaction to this murder? He's reading the stock market page on 9/28. The very day of the murder, he's in Morris Black's apartment reading the stock market page. The paper was left there open. And that was how traumatized it was for him. You know, it's not a big stretch to come up with a story after you've been given all the reports to review, autopsies, statements, pictures, try to come up with a story that fits the fact. But it couldn't be done in this case. Look at all the evidence, you can come to only one conclusion. It's murder. There's evidence of pre-planning. He had packed his apartment prior to the killing with nowhere to go, no storage place, no house to rent, no preliminary negotiations, no realtor, but his apartment just happened to be all packed up. The bow saw was bought at least 5 days prior to the murder. It was a new bow saw. You saw the cover, it's in evidence. It's a new bow saw. He wants you to believe that it was Morris Black's. The man who was so tired he would unscrew a light bulb. But he's going to go buy a brand new bow saw and just have it laying around his apartment. Doesn't make sense. He bought that saw. He bought it ahead of time because he knew what was going to happen. He withdrew the money he used to flee before the murder. The evidence shows of the beating that that Morris Black underwent at the time of the murder, and before a bullet was put into his head. You have him butchered afterwards. It's butchered, dumped in the bay, and he doesn't have to disappear for forever, just long enough for the trash to go to the dump, and it's all over. And then you have flight, not once but twice. You have evidence of murder before, during, and after Morris Black's death. And that leads to only one conclusion. That man, Robert Durst, is guilty of murder. Thank you.